In 2001, a machine rolled onto the scene that was supposed to do for walking what the calculator did for pencil and paper, the Segway. It promised to redesign cities, eliminate traffic congestion, and change the way we move forever. Venture capitalist John Doerr predicted it would be the fastest company to reach $1 billion in sales. The hype was so intense that before anyone knew what it was, journalists were calling it Jinger and speculating it was more important than the internet. But somewhere between the revolution and reality, the Segway took a hard left into the graveyard of tech. The Segway was the brainchild of Dean Kamen, an inventor with a track record of medical devices like the portable dialysis machine. But this was his moonshot. Development began in the late 1990s under extreme secrecy, codenamed Jinger. When a book proposal leaked in early 2001, the media went into a frenzy. Speculation ran wild. Some thought it was a flying car, others a personal teleporter. Apple's Steve Jobs and Amazon's Jeff Bezos were invited to a private demo in December 2000. According to Steve Kemper's book, codenamed Jinger, Jobs didn't hold back. He criticized the design, the price, and the go to market strategy. Bezos was reportedly intrigued, but Jobs saw the cracks early. At that secret meeting in South San Francisco, Steve Jobs told the Segway team they had built something remarkable, but were about to make a fatal mistake. He argued the price would be too high, the machine wasn't beautiful enough, and consumers wouldn't know what to do with it. It is a big deal, Jobs conceded, comparing it to the PC. But he warned they needed to nail the design and marketing. His advice? License the technology to someone who knew how to sell it. Dean Kamen and his investors didn't listen. They were too deep into their own revolution myth. And so the Segway launched with a $5 price tag and no clear place in the world. On December 3rd, 2001, the Segway human transporter was revealed on Good Morning America. The world finally saw Ginger. It was a two-wheeled, self-balancing electric scooter, and the reaction was a collective shrug. At $5, it cost as much as a used car. For the price of never walking again, you could get a machine that topped out at 12.5 miles per hour, less than an electric bicycle, and weighed over 80 pounds. It was too fast for sidewalks, too slow for roads, and too heavy to carry upstairs. Early adopters were limited to tech enthusiasts and wealthy gadget collectors. The revolution had arrived, but the streets were empty. The Segway faced an immediate and obvious problem. It had no legal place to go. In city after city, regulators took one look at this 12.5 mile per hour, 85-pound machine and said no. Sidewalks were for pedestrians, not motorized vehicles. Roads were for cars, not something that topped out below 20 miles per hour. Bicycle lanes? Maybe, but the Segway was wider and didn't ride like a bike. The company spent years lobbying state by state for legislation to permit use on sidewalks, but the patchwork of rules left riders confused and often ticketed. According to a 4-week MBA analysis, the regulatory battles were a major barrier to adoption. You can't redesign cities if they don't want your device on the streets. Even if you could afford it and find a path, actually living with a Segway was a chore. The first gen models weighed 83 pounds. You couldn't just fold it and take it on a bus or store it under your desk. Battery range was around 10 to 15 miles, enough for a short commute if you lived in a flat, mild climate paradise. Then there was the balance. Yes, the self-balancing tech was genius, but if you ignored the low battery warning, the machine could suddenly shut off and dump you forward. In 2003, this led to a recall after reports of injuries. Critics pointed out that for $5 you could buy a decent used car with a roof and a trunk. Practicality never stood a chance against the Segway's sleek fiction. Let's talk about the sales. When the Segway was in development, John Doerr predicted it could sell 10 Celeron units per week. Over its entire 19-year lifespan, total sales barely reached 140 Celeron units. That's less than a single week's worth of doomsday projections. To put that in perspective, Apple sold 1.4 million iPhones in its first year. The Segway company, despite pivoting names and models, never cracked the mass market. The unit economics were brutal. A niche product with high R&D and lobbying costs, chasing a customer base that mostly didn't exist. By 2009, the company had burned through multiple owners and was far from the billion-dollar IPO fantasy that once fueled the early hype. In 2003, the Segway got the spotlight it never wanted. President George W. Bush, on his family's estate in Maine, decided to take a spin. The result was a glorious faceplant captured on camera. The photo of Bush tumbling off a Segway became an instant meme before memes existed. It was a PR disaster that crystallized a growing sentiment. The Segway wasn't a serious transportation device, it was a clown car for the rich and famous. The image of a world leader falling off a machine that was supposed to be intuitive and safe was too perfect. From that moment, the Segway's cultural identity was sealed, a punchline. The Segway didn't disappear after the Bush fall, but its image never recovered. It found a niche in security, especially among mall cops and campus police who could use it to glide silently through crowds. Tourist groups adopted it for guided tours, which only amplified the sense that this was a novelty toy, not a vehicle for real people. The word Segway became shorthand for overhyped, underwhelming tech. In Silicon Valley, it's still invoked as a cautionary tale: beware the revolution that looks cool in a demo but has no place in the real world. Dean Kamen's vision of a cleaner, greener city never materialized. Instead, the machine became a symbol of what happens when you design for hype instead of people. After changing hands a few times, Segway Inc. ended up under the ownership of Chinese company Ninebot in 2015. But the writing was on the wall. The world had moved on. E-bikes and e-scooters began to fill the micromobility niche, offering cheap, lightweight, and foldable alternatives that didn't require a $5 a dollar investment or a special law to use. The Segway's underlying balancing tech lived on in Ninebot's kick scooters, but the original PT, the one that was going to redesign cities, had become an anachronism. In 2019, sales of the PT accounted for only 1.5% of the company's revenue. The dream was officially dead, it just hadn't stopped wheezing yet. On June 23rd, Segway Inc. announced it would no longer manufacture the Segway PT. The factory in Bedford, New Hampshire, where the machines were once assembled with messianic pride, was shutting down that production line. Just 21 employees were affected. The product had become a rounding error. In the middle of a global pandemic, the death of a 9-year-old Gadget barely made a ripple. The official statement from the company focused on streamlining operations and focusing on the scooter market. But for those who remembered the breathless predictions of 2001, it was the quietest possible end to the loudest possible hype. The Segway had finally taken its last glide into history. So why did the Segway fail? It wasn't just the price or the regulations or the weight. It was a product that solved a problem most people didn't have. Cities weren't begging for a walk replacer that cost a fortune and made you look like a sci-fi extra. The Segway's real legacy isn't a redesigned city, it's a lesson in hubris. When you build a solution in search of a problem, no amount of genius technology can will it into existence. The machine worked beautifully, but the market never showed up. And in the end, that's the real graveyard, not of broken tech, but of broken assumptions. Today, the Segway name still exists on electric scooters and hoverboards, but they're a far cry from Dean Kamen's original vision. The balancing technology lives on in the company's self-balancing Mini Pro, but the city-transforming transporter is gone. Perhaps the Segway was just too early, or perhaps it was a reminder that even the most brilliant inventor can't force a future that nobody asked for. As Steve Jobs might have said, sometimes the best cure for a revolution is just to walk.